Today, we're feeling very punk and want to talk about the well-known band, the Sex Pistols. Specifically, their bass player, John Simon, aka Sid Vicious, and the mystery surrounding the death of his girlfriend, Nancy Spungen. On May 10th, 1957, in the UK, Anne and John Ritchie welcomed a baby boy they named John Simon. This was the only child Anne ever had. The couple split up very early on when John Sr. abandoned Anne by encouraging her and John Simon to move to Ibiza with the promise of meeting them there, but never showing up. He had promised to send money to help take care of the two of them, but this never happened either. Anne and John Simon moved around constantly, trying to find work and enough money to get them through. Eventually, Anne had the funds to get the two of them back to England after finding work as a dealer of. As soon as Anne and John were back in the UK, they settled in North London. Anne ended up meeting a man named Christopher Beverley, and the two got married. John Simon and Christopher were very close, but sadly, 6 months after the wedding, Christopher passed away due to kidney failure. This was the real turning point for Anne. Things had not been easy for her or John Simon, and after losing her new husband, she could not keep holding it together, and the grief really sunk in. That was when her drug addiction began. Everything from opiates to. Because of this, Anne's relationship with John was incredibly tumultuous, and their family time was practically non-existent. John Simon spent a lot of time lashing out and trying to get attention, probably because he was receiving nothing from his mother. She didn't even know the name of the school he attended. That's how bad things were. Luckily, John Simon was able to find friends at a new school he started going to. He was a shy, reserved, kind of wimpy kid, but opened up about his troubled life and feelings of wanting to take his own life. He found a group of friends who all bonded over the difficult things they'd gone through, which brought him solace. These friends were John Lydon, John Gray, and John Wardle. When John Simon was just 16, Anne kicked him out of the house and onto the street. All four Johns decided to drop out of school and began squatting in abandoned buildings. They even changed their names to help out with the four John problem. John Lydon became Johnny Rotten, John Wardle became Jaw Wobble, John Gray kept his name, and John Simon, although not someone you'd describe as vicious, became Sid Vicious, inspired by a pet hamster that bit him. Even though Sid Vicious was actually a really shy guy, he took up a major interest in fashion, inspired by the glam rockers of the time like David Bowie. He started spiking his hair and wore leather jackets with studs. Johnny Rotten later said, "It would be mid-winter and bitter cold outside. He wouldn't wear a jacket because he would buy this new shirt or something. He had to be seen in this shirt." Sid and his friend group hung around King's Road in Chelsea, London, where experimental music and fashion were all the rage. The group was on their own. They woke up whenever they wanted, drank all the time, and didn't have jobs, but would busk on the street if they needed cash. Johnny Rotten and Sid Vicious would play covers of Alice Cooper songs, and people actually gave them money to stop. In 1975, Johnny Rotten joined the newly formed band, the Sex Pistols, with 3 other bandmates, Glenn Matlock, Paul Cook, and Steve Jones. Sid was around the band all the time and was a major fan, even being photographed at their infamous show in 1976 where the band attacked the audience. Sid took inspiration from the band and decided to form his own band called the Flowers of Romance. The band never performed live and never recorded any of their own songs, but this didn't stop Sid from becoming a prevalent figure in the punk scene. He wrote songs that other bands would eventually use and even learned how to play bass during this time. However, his skill is widely debated. At a 1976 Sex Pistols show at the 100 Club, Sid was there, and some dude from a band that played earlier in the night was standing in front of him, blocking his view of the stage. Sid was so irritated by this, he took out a freaking chain and bashed it into this person's head. Though no charges were pressed, the incident was reported, and come to find out, Sid was on that night. Because of this incident and Sid's rebellious, violent nature, A band called The Damned took an interest in him. They asked Sid and another man, Dave Vanian, to audition to become their lead vocalist. Sid, however, never showed up. He swore up and down that Dave and some of his friends purposely gave him incorrect info about the date and time of the audition to screw him over. This enraged Sid, and he wanted revenge. A few months after the chain incident, Sid was invited to play drums for a band called Susie and the Banshees at a 2-day punk rock festival. On the second day at the festival, The Damned were playing, and guess who was leading vocals? Dave Vanian. Sid was drunk and high and thought this was a great time to release his anger. He took a glass and threw it towards Dave, but it backfired and ended up smashing into a pillar, blinding a woman standing next to it. Who was the woman? The girlfriend of one of the band members. After this incident, Sid Vicious was arrested and put in jail. In February of the following year, the Sex Pistols lost Glenn Matlock. They claimed to have kicked Glenn out because he liked the Beatles' music, which is apparently the worst thing you can say in a punk band. However, Glenn Matlock claims it was because he was tired of the BS. Apparently, the band manager liked to cause drama between the members in a way to curate their badass punk image. This ultimately didn't do anyone any favors, and Glenn left. This left an opening for none other than Sid Vicious, the band's biggest and rowdiest fan. Sid was encouraged by pretty much everyone around and in the band to act like a complete menace, getting as drunk and high as he wanted, creating the pogo dance where he would jump straight up and down, probably as a way to get a better view of the stage. We all know why. Sid believed that since the band was known as punk, that it meant he needed to be as chaotic and disruptive as possible, as a way to keep up their image. He joined the band to replace Glenn as their new bass player, despite not being very good at playing the instrument. In March of 1977, the Sex Pistols were signed by A&M Records. Their celebration included completely trashing the A&M office. Afterward, they went out to a restaurant/club, and of course, a fight broke out among the members and multiple people there. Sid jammed a broken bottle into the face of an audio engineer, and the next day, the record company dropped them, and the radio stations refused to play their music. So much for the celebration, huh? But just because Sid was in the band didn't mean that he was going to rehearsals or being a very good bandmate. At this point, Sid was just getting deeper and deeper into his drug use, even having his mom as a supplier of. At one point, Sid was in the hospital with hepatitis due to his substance use. Things were not looking good. However, the year that the band was signed was the same year Sid met a girl named Nancy Spungen. Nancy was an American living in the UK. She was born on February 27, 1958, to Deborah and Frank Spungen. Nancy almost didn't survive her birth due to a lack of oxygen because the umbilical cord was wrapped around her neck. Throughout her early years, Nancy had various medical issues and had difficulty trusting her surroundings. When she was still a baby, pediatric doctors prescribed her liquid barbiturate in an attempt to get Nancy to sleep. Every few hours, her parents would drop the medication on her tongue, which is most commonly known to treat seizures. Nancy did not experience seizures. Nancy was a very intelligent child, but had many behavioral issues and would lash out against her younger sister and psychiatrist. At the age of 3, she began having hallucinations, which became way more intense with age. She was violent towards others and sadly was violent towards herself. When Nancy was in high school, her parents enrolled her in Devereaux Manor in Pennsylvania. She ended up running away and attempted to take her own life by taking scissors to her wrist. At age 15, Nancy was diagnosed with schizophrenia. At 16, Nancy started attending the University of Colorado Boulder, but after just a few months of being there, she was arrested for buying and was later expelled. At 17, Nancy decided she would leave for New York City to become a sex worker, doing occasional shifts at clothing stores or music journalism. She followed rock bands like Aerosmith and the Ramones and was very into the punk rock scene, including the drugs and disorder that came with it. In 1977, she flew to London where she met the Sex Pistols. Originally, Nancy had her eyes set on Johnny Rotten, but once Sid saw her, it was a done deal. The two were one and the same. When Sid got into fights, Nancy would join. If Sid was using substances, Nancy would too. After a while, Sid was completely bent to Nancy, and vice versa. It was difficult for anyone to get the two away from each other, but that didn't mean things were in a good place. At the same time, Nancy and Sid perfectly encapsulated the punk scene, and their constant fighting was well known and even encouraged in the scene. Photographers and journalists were drawn to the couple purely based on their vibe. The two were violent, destructive, and abusive towards each other. Nancy would often hit Sid before he went on stage, and the two would physically assault each other when they were under the influence. Other band members were witnesses to Sid beating Nancy, but she denied that it was his fault. The Sex Pistols were booked for a short American tour, and the band was adamant that Nancy could not join them. No one liked her, earning the nickname Nauseating Nancy because of her constant outbursts. But that didn't mean Sid was any better. The band hated what Sid had become, and Nancy only made it worse. Throughout the tour, Sid was going through withdrawals and was totally miserable. Their manager only paid him $14 a week, hoping that the lack of funds would stop his substance abuse. At one point, Sid carved "Give me a fix" into his chest before a show, hoping that someone would give him drugs afterwards. And they did. He continued his IDGAF attitude and violent streak at shows, attacking audience members for any reason he felt fit. At one show, he thought someone was making fun of his playing and struck him directly in the head with the bass guitar. Everything was always at a 10 with this dude. After this train wreck of a tour, the band was done. Johnny Rotten was fed up and they called it quits. Just days after the end of the tour, Sid boarded a plane to New York where he fell into a substance and alcohol-induced coma. The doctors told him that if he continued his reckless drinking and substance abuse, he would be dead within 6 months. Sadly, this didn't stop Sid, and he continued to spiral downwards. Once he left the hospital, he met back up with Nancy, the picture of a healthy relationship, and the two traveled to Paris. They spent most of their time in hotel rooms using substances. After some time, they had no money and needed a way to make it. It's rumored that Nancy returned to sex work, and Sid encouraged it. After gaining some cash, they traveled to a few destinations, and Nancy served as a temporary manager for Sid. She tried to book him gigs, even going as far as to start up a new band, which was called Vicious White Kids. The band only had one live performance where Nancy assisted with backup vocals, but her mic was unplugged for the set. Eventually, Sid and Nancy left for New York and stayed at Hotel Chelsea. They moved rooms as they set their first one on fire. Imagine being a housekeeper at one of these places and Sid and Nancy are in the room you're assigned to. I would quit. Too much work. Too stressful. The thing is, having a well-known punk rocker like Sid Vicious was bound to get you some cash. These shows were big and drew a crowd. However, some audiences booed Sid because he made a poor attempt at trying to recreate Johnny's sound. Of course, this pissed him off, and he would retaliate and insult the crowds. While the pair had some money, they used it all on substances and alcohol. Nancy ended up calling her parents to ask for financial help. While on the phone with her mother, Nancy admitted that the relationship was toxic and abusive. She had developed kidney problems and wanted to get Sid on a detox program. A lot was finally bubbling to the surface. In a later interview with Nancy's mother, she admitted that she knew it would be the last time she talked to her. She explained that it was the first conversation the two had in years where her daughter was totally clear and listened to her. You know when you just have a gut feeling that something isn't right? I can't imagine having that feeling with your own daughter. But a mother's intuition is rarely wrong. On October 11th of 1978, the couple was hosting a party in their hotel room. They had an open door policy with all of their friends, which meant anyone could come or go as they pleased. Of course, there were copious amounts of substances and alcohol, and Sid slipped into an unconscious state after consuming about 30 plus pills. The people at the party said that it looked like Sid wanted to take his life. At around 2:30 4:30 in the morning, Sid was still out cold, and Nancy asked a dealer friend to get her some painkillers. At 5 o'clock, the last of their friends had left the room. 2 hours later, people from the rooms next door reported hearing loud moans coming from a female. Shortly after, Sid awoke from his coma and called down to the front desk. Nancy had been stabbed. She was lifeless. When paramedics rushed to the scene, Nancy was underneath the bathroom sink with a single puncture wound to her abdomen. Immediately, Sid Vicious was arrested for second-degree murder, under the assumption that he was the one who had killed Nancy, which seems to make the most sense as it was just her and him in the hotel room. When questioned by the police, Sid flip-flopped multiple times on his story. At first, he admitted to doing it, then said he couldn't remember what happened, and then admitted that he didn't mean to kill her. It gets a little tricky when you remember that Sid had taken 30+ pills, and at that point, he should not have even been alive. It's difficult to say what he would have even remembered being in a state like that. There are a couple of possibilities we could look at. One, Sid and Nancy had an incredibly toxic, abusive, and violent relationship. Sid was also known to be chaotic and reckless with his fans and random people who spoke to him wrong. Could Sid have woken up and gotten into an argument with Nancy? Maybe that was the final straw? Or maybe it was an accident, but he still thrust the knife. Two, there were a couple of drug dealers who had been in the hotel room that night. The couple kept money in their bedside table along with a blade. Maybe Nancy saw someone coming for their cash and they attacked her? I mean, an open door policy leads to a lot of unknown people coming in and out. And when everyone is high and drunk, who knows who could have been in that room that night? 3, Nancy could have harmed herself. Perhaps she made an end-it-all pact with Sid that night. I mean, he was seen taking all of those pills like he wanted to end his life. She could have seen him on the bed assuming he was dead, or maybe she jabbed herself during an argument to cause a scene. Many people believed that Sid was incapable of doing something like that to Nancy. He was pretty incoherent the night of the murder and needed help standing up and walking. Could someone like that really have stabbed Nancy? One possibility is the dealer that left to get substances for Nancy. After he returned from getting them, he saw that everyone had left the room. Sid was out cold on the bed, and assuming he was lifeless, the dealer took the money from the nightstand. Nancy came out of the bathroom, saw what he was doing, and started freaking out at him. The dealer took the blade that was sitting nearby and stabbed her, pushing her back into the bathroom to die. This dealer denies it was him, but conveniently blamed it on another dealer in the hotel lobby. We will never know for sure what happened that night. Sid was released on bail, covered by Virgin Records, and was completely miserable. In an interview, he was asked where he would like to be, and Sid responded with under the ground. He even tried to take his own life by slashing his wrists, explaining that he felt life was meaningless without her. His old manager, however, used all the publicity as a way to sell merch and promote an upcoming reunion with the Sex Pistols. After completing a rehab program, Sid and his mother went back to the Chelsea hotel and celebrated his release by doing $200 worth of. On top of that, Sid took 4 Quaaludes. After this, he never woke up. He was found with a note in his pocket stating, "We had a death pact, and I have to keep my end of the bargain." Well, everyone, that is the super sad story of Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen. What did you all think of this one? It just shows that a rock and roll lifestyle isn't all it's chalked up to be. I wish things could have happened differently for both of them. What do you all think happened to Nancy? Well, thanks for watching Killer Bites. I'm Brandy. See you next time. Olympic athletes are put under a lot of pressure, from the extensive hours of training and coach lectures to the immense physical and emotional strain. These athletes undergo a lot to be the best of the best. But would the pressure and stress of being an Olympic athlete be enough to make Oscar Pistorius kill his girlfriend? Oscar Pistorius was a South African sprinter who overcame even more challenges than most. At 11 months old, both of his legs were amputated below the knee. Since he was a kid, Oscar was super into sports, which he was able to participate in thanks to the modern technology of prosthetics. He first showed interest in rugby, but after sustaining a knee injury from a rugby match at age 16, Oscar had to find a new sport that would allow him to recover. That's when he decided to start running track. And what a life-changing decision that was. It was quickly revealed that Oscar was one hell of a runner. He got these racing blades, which are a form of prosthetics specifically for running, and quickly earned the nickname Blade Runner. Oscar raced in the Paralympics, and in 2012, he went on to compete in the Olympics as the first amputee to participate in Olympic track events and the first double amputee to ever compete in the games, period. But just 1 year later, Oscar's career would go down the toilet. And it wasn't because of an injury. It's because he was arrested for killing his girlfriend. Super early in the morning on Valentine's Day of 2013, Oscar was at his home in Pretoria, South Africa with his 29-year-old girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp. Riva was a beautiful blonde South African model and reality TV star who had beauty and brains because she also worked as a paralegal. Now, most couples on Valentine's Day celebrate their love with chocolate-covered strawberries and roses, but Oscar, he opted for a firearm. Yeah, we're not exactly sure the details of what led to this, but we'll analyze it all a little later. So Riva was in the toilet cubicle with the door locked, and Oscar was on the other side of the toilet door. He lifted up the pistol, pointed the barrel at the door, and fired 4 times. 3 of those bullets hit Riva. One passed through her fingers and hit her arm, another hit her directly above her right ear, and the third went straight into her hip. Oscar started panicking, but couldn't even get into the toilet cubicle to see the damage, so that's when he grabbed a cricket bat and broke the toilet door down. Minutes later, Oscar called the manager of his gated community, asking him to get an ambulance. Crazy thought, why couldn't Oscar call for an ambulance? The fact that he went out of his way to call the manager at 3 a.m. to ask him to call for an ambulance just does not make sense to me. Anyway, the manager called for first responders while Oscar tended to Riva. He picked up her body from the bathroom floor and carried her downstairs. He then set her down at the base of the staircase and apparently started giving her mouth to mouth. I'm so confused. Isn't he the one who just fired at her? At some point during that time, Oscar's neighbor, Johan, arrived. He just so happened to be a doctor, so he tried to open Riva's airway by doing this jaw lift maneuver thingy. And from what I could tell, there was someone else who'd arrived at the house, and they tried tying a tourniquet around Riva's arm wound. At first, Riva was making these gurgling sounds and appeared to be breathing, but Johan knew that given Riva's head wounds, it was too late. Shortly after that, she stopped breathing. Johan did all the basic things like check Riva's pulse, pupils, and breathing patterns and determined she was gone. Sometime around 4 a.m., South African detective Hilton Botha got a phone call from his colonel saying Oscar shot his girlfriend. Hilton jumped out of bed, got dressed, and headed for Oscar's house as quickly as possible. When he got there and opened the door, he saw Riva at the base of the stairs and knew this was about to be a roller coaster of a case. Hilton walked up the staircase to Oscar's bedroom to check out the scene where it all went down. And just to paint the full picture for you, it was a fancy marble staircase, and the whole house was so freaking huge and nice. Oscar was doing well for himself. Anyway, Hilton walked into the master bedroom and made his way to the bathroom door, which was covered in bullets. On the bathroom floor, there was a red-stained cricket bat, 2 cell phones, and a 9mm parabellum pistol. By the look of things, Detective Hilton knew exactly what had happened, or he at least had a very strong hunch. The only people that appeared to be in the house at the time of the crime were Oscar and Riva. There were no signs of forced entry, other than the open window in the bathroom, but it didn't seem like a feasible option. And it didn't look like a situation where Oscar may have been startled by a Riva surprise entrance, because based on the security log, she'd been over at Oscar's for like 3 days. Detective Hilton was so certain Oscar was responsible, he told his colonel to arrest Oscar because by then he'd already been read his rights. And it does sound a little hard that Hilton had already come to this conclusion so early on, but he was very familiar with Oscar, and not just because of his running ability. In 2009, Oscar was hosting a party at his house and ended up in a fight with his at the time girlfriend, Melissa. Well, the argument between Oscar and Melissa got so heated that they decided to kick everyone out. An attendee named Cassidy was going through one of the doors as Oscar was trying to close it, and he got so angry that he slammed it on her super hard. After that, Oscar just started punching this door like crazy, which caused a panel to fall on Cassidy's leg. 6 weeks earlier, Cassidy had just gotten a cast taken off of that leg after getting reconstructive surgery on her ankle. So that panel did some major damage to her leg. Cassidy went up to Oscar sometime after that to tell him he hurt her, and he replied, "Well, call your lawyer." Here's something super interesting though. Detective Hilton was the one who actually arrested Oscar, which is why I think he was so confident in his theory, aside from all the other evidence at the crime scene that screamed Oscar did it. So back to Riva's case in 2013. Detective Hilton walked into the garage where Oscar was sitting on a gym bench wearing clothes that were soaked in his girlfriend's DNA. He had his head in his surprisingly clean hands and was sobbing. Detective Hilton asked, "Did you wash your hands?" Oscar said yes, because they were full of blood. Hilton then asked Oscar if he remembered him from their encounter a few years prior. He said yes. Now here's the question we've all been waiting for. What the heck happened? Oscar replied, "I thought it was a burglar." You thought your girlfriend sitting on the toilet was a burglar? If you're gonna lie, at least make it a believable one. Well, Oscar stuck with the story, and he went on to embellish the tale by claiming he had perception deprivation from loud fans and the dark room. He heard the bathroom door screech open and swore Riva was still in his bed, so he was like, it has to be an intruder. Here's my thing though. What intruder would break in through a tiny bathroom window and just hang out in the locked toilet stall? So after Riva's body was examined, it was determined that she couldn't have been sitting on the toilet because all of the bullets hit her on the right side. So she must have been crouching behind the locked toilet door, which makes me think she was hiding in the bathroom because she was scared of Oscar. And based on the way the casings were found in the bathroom, detectives concluded Oscar was aiming from less than 5 feet away from the door, giving me even more reason to believe this theory is faulty. You'd think he'd be able to discern a burglar from his girlfriend, even if it was behind a toilet door. Here's another red flag. The trajectory of the bullets seemed to have been angled down, meaning Oscar must have been wearing his prosthetic legs. But in his interviews, Oscar claimed he wasn't on his prosthetics. Well, Oscar was officially taken into custody and charged with slaughtering Riva on February 15th, a day after the crime. He had his bail hearing just a few days later, and that's when Detective Hilton, Prosecutor Nell, and a few others testified against Oscar, saying he put on his prosthetic legs, walked to the bathroom, and purposefully fired at Riva through the toilet door. Nell claimed it had to be premeditated based on the amount of time it all took. Detective Hilton said Oscar was dangerous and should remain in custody before his trial because he had a house in Italy and offshore bank accounts. Oscar's lawyer was all like, Oscar doesn't have a house in Italy, and even if he did try to run away, someone would notice him in his prosthetics. The judge determined Oscar wasn't a flight risk, so he released him on bail, which was like $115,000 US. But something insane happened during the 4 days of the bail hearing. Detective Hilton presented contradictory evidence and confessed to making all of these mistakes at the crime scene. And then on the 22nd, right before the final day of the bail hearing, it was discovered that Detective Hilton was facing charges of attempted manslaughter. Yeah, so in 2011, Detective Hilton and 2 other police officers allegedly fired at a taxi with 7 people inside. So this case against Detective Hilton had been dropped, but a little over a week before Riva's incident, it was reinstated. Once that connection was made, Detective Hilton was removed from the case and someone else was reassigned as lead detective. The trial began that March, and here was Oscar's full story. He said at like 10 o'clock that night, Riva was doing yoga in the bedroom while he was watching TV in bed. They both fell asleep, but in the middle of the night, Oscar woke up to bring a fan in from the balcony and close the doors, blinds, and curtains. While he was up, he heard a noise coming from the bathroom and thought it was someone trying to break in. He said he whispered to Riva to call the police and grabbed his pistol from under his bed without even putting his prosthetics on. Now, Oscar said he was too scared to turn on the lights, which is why he didn't think that Riva wasn't in bed. He said he went into the bathroom and noticed the window wasn't closed and the door to the toilet was locked. That's when he said, and I quote, "It filled me with horror and fear of an intruder or intruders being inside the toilet. I thought he or they must have entered through the unprotected window. As I did not have my prosthetic legs on and felt extremely vulnerable, I knew I had to protect Riva and myself. I believed that when the intruders came out of the toilet, we would be in grave danger. I felt trapped as my bedroom door was locked and I have limited mobility on my stumps." So he fired 4 times at the door while yelling at Riva to call the police. But when he didn't hear Riva, he got nervous. Oscar made his way back to the bedroom and was still too scared to turn the lights on, so he felt around in the bed and realized she wasn't there. Then he thought, wait, was that Riva in the toilet room? And, well, you know the rest. Now, I'm on the fence with this because I don't think it makes sense for someone to bust in through the bathroom door and hide in the toilet, but when I learned Oscar came from a household where firearms were collected, it made me stop and think. Oscar's dad and brothers reportedly own a total of 55 firearms, which is just way too much. They say it's for hunting and protection, but like 55? So that makes me think that Oscar may have been exposed to the whole "I heard a noise, grab a loaded weapon" thing at a young age. And I'm not trying to say what he did wasn't bad, but I'm just trying to understand the logic of it. People make rash decisions sometimes, and for someone like Oscar who's exposed to the mindset of always resorting to grabbing a pistol, you can see how things escalated so quickly. But then that brings us to the argument of whether or not this was premeditated and Oscar knew it was Riva. Oscar and Riva had only been dating for 3 months, and Riva was the reason he broke up with his previous girlfriend, Samantha. So things are already sticky. While Oscar was known for being violent towards women. Exhibit A, his arrest in 2009. On top of that, a few other exes of Oscar's said he would harm and threaten them. Samantha said Oscar used to beat her and lock her in his house with no food. He was super aggressive towards her, and she was so scared at one point she hid his pistol from him. Well, it seemed like Oscar was the same with Riva. And based on messages between the two, Riva was afraid of Oscar and may have wanted to break up. She texted him saying, "I'm scared of you sometimes and how you snap at me and of how you will react to me." Another text, she talked about being attacked and told Oscar, "You're the one person I deserve protection from." This is all making me suspect Oscar felt Riva was going to end things, so he resorted to violence and intentionally fired at her. It's really sad that Riva tried calling him out for his aggressive behavior and was just met with even more violence. That's the thing about cases like these. There's no easy way out. Yeah, we can see the signs as an outsider, and it seems like Riva did too, but it's more complicated than just break up with him and leave. You never know what that person is capable of, especially if you've only been dating for 3 months and you're already experiencing extreme spouts of anger. Oscar had a lot of money and could do a lot of things to torment Riva or any of his other past girlfriends. And after hearing that stuff from Samantha, it makes me wonder if Riva was being locked in the house in the days leading up to her demise. Okay, so I can speculate on this all day, but when all is said and done, we'll never fully know because Riva will sadly never be able to tell her side of the story. So here's what ended up happening in court. First of all, the defense tried to say Oscar had generalized anxiety disorder, which influenced his decisions that day. That caused a delay in the trial because Oscar had to get a full mental health exam where psychologists determined he didn't have any form of an anxiety disorder. In September of 2014, the judge found Oscar not guilty for intentionally killing Riva, but guilty of culpable homicide, which basically means he did it by accident. He was also found guilty of reckless endangerment for firing a bullet in a restaurant a month before Riva's crime, which, crazy, but makes sense. Oscar was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but was released on good behavior after just 10 months. In December of 2015, Oscar's Hami conviction was overturned, and he was found guilty of intentionally executing Riva. He was first sentenced to 6 years in jail, but in 2017, his sentence was doubled to 13 years and 4 months. He will be eligible for parole in 2023. Thanks for watching Killer Bites. I'm Brandy. I'll see you guys next time.
Big Lurch's music and poetry spoke of terrifying ordeals. In a case of life imitating art, he would find himself at the center of a violent and gruesome murder that shocked the music world. On April 10, 2002, rapper Big Lurch killed and cannibalized the body of his 21-year-old roommate Tanisha Isaias for seemingly no reason at all. Isaias had been found by a friend lying on the floor of her apartment she shared with her boyfriend, Thomas Moore, as well as rapper Big Lurch. Her chest had been forcefully torn open, and a 3-inch blade had become stuck in her scapula. Her lung had been ripped from her chest and had numerous teeth marks on it. Teeth marks also covered her face, as if someone had tried to chew the flesh clean off. But just who was the maniac who did this, and why? That same evening, police received a call from a woman who claimed to see a naked man on the street. He was staring at the sky, and his mouth, chest, and stomach appeared to be covered in blood. He was mumbling and chewing slowly on something. When police arrived at the scene, they tried to question him, but he would only respond with animalistic growls and grunts. He was taken into custody, and his details were run through the system. His identity was revealed to be that of 25-year-old Antron Singleton, aka rapper Big Lurch, a rising hip-hop star who hailed from Texas. Tanisha's case was linked back to Lurch, and he was charged with murder. So just how did Big Lurch find himself in the position of hip-hop prodigy to murderer? Big Lurch began his career at the age of 15, performing around Texas. He coined the name Big Lurch from the character of Lurch from the Addams Family. He too, like Lurch, was a formidable figure, tall and well-built. Lurch managed to generate significant buzz around his music while in Texas, and decided to move out to San Francisco to further his dream of becoming hip-hop royalty. While there, he met other notable musicians, elevating himself as a hip-hop rising star. He made his debut appearance on E40's 1996 album, The Hall of Game. Lurch eventually joined a group called Cosmic Slop Shop, and while their record received positive feedback, it was not a commercial success, and the group disbanded. More bad news followed for Lurch as the 2000s appeared on the horizon. His grandmother passed away, and this traumatic incident was shortly followed by yet another trauma. Lurch was involved in a horrific car accident that injured his neck and left him with chronic pain and trouble walking. Because he was dealing with severe pain on a daily basis, Lurch made the unfortunate decision to start smoking peace to cope with his ailments. This quickly spiraled into a mind-bending dependency. It was initially used as an anesthetic and was discontinued in 1965 due to the severe side effects. It reportedly caused patients to become agitated and delusional, numbed them to pain, and also resulted in frightening hallucinations. Many violent and disturbing crimes have been linked to its use. Lurch was eventually approached by music labels such as BMR or Black Market Records. He signed with BMR and began working on his debut album. But things were tense at BMR due to gang affiliations that many on the label had. Lurch was at odds with this and decided to move back to Texas, quitting any work on the album. While in Texas, he struggled to make ends meet and resorted to selling. He ended up in jail for his crimes, but luck seemed to smile upon him when the owner of BMR decided to help Lurch out with his case. Milton Grimes was a reputable lawyer and took Lurch under his wing, despite the bad blood that had occurred between the two. As a way to thank him for his efforts, Big Lurch decided to finish off the album. He began to delve into the genre known as horrorcore, a rap style with horror themes and imagery, often referencing known serial killers or fictional killers and monsters. Lurch moved to Los Angeles, and this is when he became more involved in his use of. He claimed that one night, while at the apartment he shared with a roommate and his girlfriend, Tanisha Isaias, he and some friends and associates began consuming large amounts of. Lurch claimed that it had been forced upon him, and before long, he was lost to oblivion. He claimed he eventually came to with no recollection of what had happened, but was facing a murder charge. The last thing he could recall was thinking that the world was ending, and that he had to find and kill the devil. Police began to piece together bits of information to form a conclusive timeline of the events of April 10th. After getting high, Lurch allegedly told everyone in the apartment, save for Tanisha, to leave. For reasons unknown, he then snuck up behind Tanisha and hit her over the head with a child's scooter. She fell to the floor and Lurch began to straddle her, clutching a knife in his hand. He repeatedly stabbed her in the chest before spreading the wound wide open and sticking his hand inside the cavity. He pushed her ribs apart, exposing her internal organs. He managed to pull out her right lung and began to chew on it in a frenzy. Somewhere during that time, he also bit her face repeatedly. Lurch then fled the scene and went out into the night, naked and covered in Tanisha's blood. After his arrest, Lurch was in a bad state. He was completely unaware of his surroundings or the reality he found himself in. This state lasted for a full 2 weeks, and he was entirely at the mercy of his hallucinogenic drug binge. A medical examination was conducted on Lurch, and it was found that the contents of his stomach included human flesh and tissue. There was no doubt he had consumed Tanisha's flesh. During his trial, the evidence was against him. Songs from his upcoming debut album were used by the prosecution due to the grim lyrics about murder. The song I Did It to You mentioned the killers Jeffrey Dahmer and Charles Manson and featured lines like, "'Cause murder's a hobby, I'm using a torture chamber and not a Ruger." The prosecution claimed these songs were a blueprint for the murder and that Lurch was obsessed with the idea of killing long before he committed the crime. Lurch pleaded not guilty due to insanity, however. The jury didn't buy it. On November 7th, 2003, the jury deliberated. It took them less than 1 hour to reach a guilty verdict for first-degree murder, torture, and aggravated mayhem. Lurch was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but not everyone welcomed this sentence. Tanisha's mother, Carolyn Stinson, shared her theory with the media that Big Lurch had been set up by his record label and Tanisha's boyfriend, Thomas Moore. She filed a wrongful death suit against the record label, claiming that they had provided Lurch with drugs to encourage him to act out in an extreme violent manner so as to make him more marketable as a gangsta rap artist. Stinson alleged that Tanisha's boyfriend was actually the killer, and the reason her daughter's flesh was found in Lurch's stomach was because Lurch was high and reasoned that her lung was a piece of meat that had simply fallen to the floor. Lurch also claimed innocence, saying that those he was involved with had gotten him high on purpose to take advantage of him. Lurch also accused his lawyer Milton Grimes of a setup. According to Lurch, Grimes coerced Lurch into admitting to the crime and pleading insanity. To this day, Lurch claims he was set up by his label and lawyer. An insanity defense can only be used if there is an underlying and known mental health condition. Despite Lurch having been diagnosed with bipolar previously, Grimes did not use this in his defense for reasons still unknown. This seemed odd as Grimes was a prominent lawyer who knew full well of California law and regulations, as well as Lurch's diagnosis. Lurch claims that Grimes lost the case on purpose to gain favor on another case. A year later, in 2004, Grimes was ordered to pay $1.2 million after he lost a malpractice case where he was found to have failed to properly litigate another case. Stinson also alleged that was forced down the throats of Lurch and Tanisha as the drug was found in her system, but she was not known to use it recreationally. There were several handprints and footprints found at the scene that did not belong to Lurch, which, according to Stinson, indicates foul play. Big Lurch also owned a pit bull at that point, however, any involvement was ruled out. Strangely, the bite marks on Tanisha's face and organs were never tested to see if they matched Big Lurch. In later interviews after his imprisonment, Big Lurch contradicts himself, stating that he only used for the first time on the night of April 10th. But in another interview, he claims was a big part of the lifestyle and that he used it regularly. Either way, that fateful night, Big Lurch was searching for the devil and found it in himself. What really happened still remains a mystery, but what is clear is that an innocent woman lost her life in a brutal and depraved way. In the end, the tragedy of Tanisha Isaias serves as a warning of the devastating consequences of drug abuse and the fragility of the human mind. It echoes the darker side of the music industry, where artists can find themselves entangled in a web of exploitation and self-destruction. The story of Big Lurch and Tanisha Isaias will forever haunt the annals of both true crime and music history, a reminder of the darkness that can consume even the most talented individuals, and that the devil can lurk closer to home than we ever suspected.
If there are two things to know about me, it's that I love true crime and celeb gossip. This story combines both elements in one insane crime involving Lady Gaga's dog walker, Ryan Fisher. You might think the criminals were after Ryan to potentially get dirt on Lady Gaga or figure out a way to get to her, but they were actually after her French bulldogs. Let me set the scene for you. The day is Wednesday, February 24th, 2021. The location is West Hollywood, California. It's about 9:30 at night, and Ryan is taking Gaga's 3 French bulldogs, Miss Asia, Koji, and Gustave, out for their nightly walk. As he's walking down Sunset Boulevard, a car is slowly following him. Suddenly, the car speeds up and slams on the brakes in the middle of the street right in front of Ryan. 2 dudes jump out of the car and start shouting, "Give it up!" They were actually talking about the dogs. The bad guys try to grab the dogs' leashes, but Ryan isn't giving up so easily. And do you blame him? His whole job is to protect and care for these dogs. Ryan grabs his champagne bottle and starts whacking the dudes. Meanwhile, one of the dogs, Miss Asia, manages to escape. She runs into the bushes and Ryan is gesturing at her to stay back. These 2 guys are ruthless, and they just keep beating Ryan. They're throttling his neck, trying to rip the dog leashes away, and then a firearm is pulled and all bets are off. Within seconds, Ryan is on the ground with a bullet wound to the neck, and the 2 men are skirting away in their white Nissan Altima with Koji and Gustave in tow. It makes me wonder if they knew who those dogs belonged to. So Ryan is on the floor, losing fluid quickly. Miss Asia, who escaped the captors, runs over to Ryan as he shouts, "I've been shot! I'm bleeding out of my heart, out of my lung, I'm bleeding out of my chest. They stole the dogs." This all happened in front of the home of a guy named Carlos who ran out to help Ryan. The bullet had lodged through Ryan's neck and out of the back of his shoulder. Along the way, it pierced one of his lungs. He also had broken ribs and was all sliced up on his arms and legs from the scuffle. So we're dealing with serious injuries here. Carlos was trying to keep Ryan conscious until the medics arrived, telling him that he'd be okay, that he needed to keep breathing and keep his eyes open. It didn't take long for the cops to arrive, and when they did, Ryan was still alive, but barely. And at that moment, he didn't know if he would survive, but he wanted to make sure the dogs could be rescued, like a true hero. So he ended up saying the dogs belonged to Lady Gaga, which definitely lit a fire under everyone's. Ryan had actually gone back and forth on saying who the dogs belonged to, but the reason he decided to name drop Gaga was that he knew it would be the easiest way to spread the word and potentially lead to their rescue. But at the same time, you know how ruthless the tabloids are, so there was a possibility this could go wrong. Anyway, Ryan said the dogs were Lady Gaga's, and the news spread like wildfire. Ryan was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. During the ride, medics were putting in chest tubes, trying to stop the blood flow, and doing everything they could to keep him alive. Ryan later recalled looking over at the machines monitoring his vitals and saw how low his blood pressure had dropped. He could tell by the medics' faces that his situation was dire, but he still managed to make jokes on the ride. Once the ambulance got to the hospital, he was brought to an operating room and it was straight to surgery. There were almost 10 people working on Ryan, trying to save his life. Doctors were able to remove the top third of his lung and a chunk from the bottom of it too. The procedure saved his life. But there was a long road to recovery ahead in all aspects. Once Lady Gaga found out about the incident, I'm sure she was absolutely shocked and devastated. But it also took everyone a second to piece everything together because she and her team were in Italy. Ryan's assistant, Alicia, she had recently seen him but had no idea what had happened. Once Lady Gaga's team asked her to confirm if what they just heard was true, Alicia tried to get down to the bottom of it all. She went over to Ryan's apartment, empty. Then over to the crime scene. Definitely not empty, but also not helpful. The police wouldn't tell her anything. Then the girl starts following some cop car, thinking it would help her figure out where Ryan was, but it didn't seem promising. And that's when she made a realization. Ryan has an iPhone, so she can track him on Find My iPhone. She successfully found the location of his phone, Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, which seemed to confirm the whole story going around. Alicia was able to make it to Ryan's ICU room to see him. He was conscious, but on a ventilator, so he couldn't speak or anything. But even still, he wrote a message to Alicia on a piece of paper. It said, When do they do the bloodletting? Which was obviously a joke, one that made Alicia laugh. So the day after the incident, Lady Gaga posted on Instagram begging for help in getting her pups back. She offered $500,000 in exchange for their safe return, and then wrote, "I continue to love you, Ryan Fisher. You risked your life to fight for our family. You're forever a hero." That same day, authorities were able to recover footage of the attack caught on one of those Ring cameras. One day after that, and 2 days after the attack, if you're keeping track, a woman emailed the police saying she found the dogs. They were apparently in an alley tied to a pole. And I'm a little torn here because why would these dudes go through all of that trouble to steal Lady Gaga's 2 French bulldogs and then just ditch them on the street? I guess they saw all the media coverage and didn't want to be discovered. Well, the female tipster brought in the 2 dogs, who were confirmed to be Koji and Gustav. The police thanked her for her help and concluded she wasn't involved in the crime, so they let her go. But even though Gaga's fur babies were returned, poor Ryan was still in the hospital recovering from his injuries and dealing with serious PTSD. He was tired of everyone asking about the incident, making him relive it over and over again. He would also get extremely triggered by sights and sounds that reminded him of the attack. Anything along the lines of popping noises and dog barks were key triggers. And like, as amazing as it is that Ryan survived, I feel like a lot of times that's where the coverage ends. We all love a happy ending, but it's not realistic. PTSD is real, and it's important to talk about the aftermath of these kinds of events. A week after the crime, Ryan was sent home from the hospital only to experience a collapsed lung that sent him back to the hospital. He kept getting fixed and sent home to get another collapsed lung. In total, his lung collapsed 5 times, and he ended up having to get more of it removed. When he was released for the final time, Ryan went to stay at Lady Gaga's house to start the recovery process. Gaga hired a trauma therapist to work with Ryan to help him in the beginning. Imagine being Lady Gaga in this situation. First, you're told your dogs have been stolen, and the dog walker was shot, definitely causing devastation and guilt. Then you're told your dogs are found, but the dog walker isn't doing well, so relief and more guilt. And to top things off, you're all the way in Italy filming a movie, so you're so detached from the situation. Okay, so we know what happened, and we know Ryan survived, but do we know who did it? We're about to. In late April, 5 people were arrested in relation to the crime. 3 guys ranging from 18 to 27 years old were charged with conspiracy to commit robbery, second-degree robbery, attempted murder, and some other charges relating to assault and possession. One of the dude's dads and the dude's dad's girlfriend were charged as accessories to the crime. Want to know who the dude's dad's girlfriend was? The same woman who emailed the freaking police and turned the dogs in. So she was involved. The story goes, the 3 dudes hopped in the car that day and drove around just looking for a crime to commit. They saw French bulldogs, which meant easy money, so they followed Ryan and the dogs until they made it to a somewhat low-key street where they thought they'd get away with stealing the dogs. The 3 men were identified by Ryan in a police lineup. And even though he'd gone through such an awful attack, Ryan felt kind of bad sending these guys to prison, knowing how broken the system is. So we've got the criminals behind bars, Gaga's dogs back in her possession, and Ryan trying to heal from all the emotional and physical trauma. He never went back to his dog walker position. Ryan actually ditched his apartment, gave his car to his assistant, and left LA on a soul-searching road trip. Months later, he set up a GoFundMe for financial help. It's kind of sad too, because Lady Gaga didn't really check in on Ryan when she got back. She also didn't pay the last invoice his assistant sent over. Ryan ended up surpassing his GoFundMe goal of $40,000, which he planned to use to support himself as he recovered and buy a van or bus for his new nomadic lifestyle. Now that we've reached some sort of conclusion here, let's talk about the motive. Ryan and the police don't think the criminals knew these dogs belonged to Lady Gaga. They think they were just after the dogs because of their price tag. By that, I mean French bulldogs are expensive, like several thousands of dollars expensive. And I would agree with this. I feel like these people didn't know the dogs were Lady Gaga's because one, they would probably commit a larger crime if they did, and two, they were clearly terrified and immediately returned the dogs once they did find out. But my thing is, why did they think they would even get away with this if it were a random stranger's dogs? I guess a lot of dog nappings go unsolved, but in Los Angeles in 2021, everyone has security cameras, so it's comical that these criminals were under the impression that they wouldn't get caught. And now I throw it to you. What do you think the true motive was behind this crime? Do you think the criminals knew the dogs were Lady Gaga's or not? Do you think Lady Gaga should have given Ryan more money? And lastly, what do you think of these dogs' names? Because I'm obsessed. Well, everyone, that's all I have for you today. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Brandy, and I'll see you next time on Killer Bites.
Now, if you were anything like me, you probably imagine astronauts to be pretty smart, level-headed, and good-natured people, right? Well, I mean, they're put through some super intense training to prepare them to survive incredibly long and isolating trips floating in space. So then how did Lisa Nowak, an accomplished aeronautical engineer, NASA astronaut, and United States Navy captain, go completely off the rails and become the first astronaut ever to face felony charges? So who was Lisa really? Lisa Marie Nowak was born in Washington, D.C. on May 10th, 1963, and she was literally primed to work at NASA. In 1985, Lisa graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy with a Bachelor of Science in Aerospace Engineering, and after 10 years in the Navy, in 1996, she was selected by NASA to be an astronaut at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, qualifying as a mission specialist in robotics. That sounds pretty cool. I mean, you could say she was pretty freaking accomplished, right? And yet, despite her many accomplishments, Lisa Nowak, once described as an American hero of epic proportions, may only be remembered for that fateful night when she drove over 900 miles and 14 hours from Houston to Orlando in the wee hours of February 5th, 2007 to confront her ex-lover's new girlfriend after a devastating rejection. Yeah, you could say she was ready to go. So how on earth, or rather in space, did we get here? Let's back up for a minute. Lisa Nowak met the ex-lover in question, Bill O'Faline, in 1996 while training together in the NASA Space Shuttle program. And just by the nature of that training, they spent a lot of time in close quarters, apparently sharing a desk and even once spending a week and a half together training for cold weather survival. But their relationship didn't officially begin until 2004. And despite both being married and both having kids, things started getting cozy outside of the office, and they had an affair that lasted 3 years. During the course of the affair, Bill eventually ended things with his wife, Michaela, while Lisa stayed married to her husband, Richard Nowak, until they separated in early 2007. A few weeks prior to the infamous incident, Bill decided to end things with Lisa, telling her that he was falling in love with his new and younger girlfriend, an Air Force captain with an engineering degree named Colin Shipman, who he had started dating a few months prior. In an apparent foreshadowing, Colleen asked Bill how Lisa took the news, telling the police that she even asked him, "Is there gonna be some crazy lady showing up at my door trying to kill me?" To which Bill replied that Lisa was totally fine with it and even happy for him. Despite the fact that she continued to call and text him almost daily, Bill later reiterated to police that it seemed like Lisa took the news well, all things considered. Well, as we know, Lisa did not take this well. Using a key that she still had to Bill's apartment, Lisa broke in and dug through his computer. And what did she find? Yeah, some pretty raunchy emails sent between Bill and Colleen while Bill was on a mission to the International Space Station. Just to give you a preview, the subject line on one reads, "I need a rub down." To quote Colleen, "First urge will be to rip your clothes off, anxious to get to you alone." And this one from Bill, "I need to see you. I'm having Colleen withdrawals. Must see Colleen." This all sends Lisa over the edge because nobody needs to see all of that when you're going through a breakup. And in the midst of her apparent spiral, along with the emails, Lisa also finds Colleen's travel plans. And that's when she resolves to do what any reasonable person would do. Get in your car, drive 14 hours, and confront the girl that's stealing your dude. So Lisa takes off on her mission to hunt down Colleen, armed with, well, reportedly quite a few things, including a steel mallet, buck knife, a BB gun with ammo, latex gloves, 4 feet of rubber tubing, duct tape, garbage bags, a floppy disk containing images of bondage, a map to Colleen's neighborhood, and the only thing she actually ended up using on her victim was pepper spray. Crazy. She came in locked and loaded. She also reportedly packed, rather infamously, a bunch of adult diapers because she didn't want to make any pit stops and bathroom breaks on her way from Houston to Orlando. That's weird, but we're moving forward. That's how you know she put some thought into all this, right? Just think about like running through your house and grabbing all this shit. And then you take a pit stop at Home Depot for your mallets and then duct tape. I mean, that's not suspicious at all. So Lisa takes off on her mission, beelining it straight from Houston to Orlando. This drive is over 900 miles and takes over 14 hours. So she finally arrives at the Orlando International Airport after midnight, disguised in a black wig and a trench coat. Again, super not suspicious at all, right? And she's just hanging around baggage claim, waiting for Colleen to appear. Lisa eventually spots Colleen in the terminal and she sees her getting on a shuttle to head to her car. So Lisa continues to follow her onto the shuttle. As Colleen gets off the shuttle and starts heading to her car, she hears someone behind her and she can feel that she's being pursued. Naturally, Colleen started to hustle to get to her car a little faster and frantically jumps in, because if someone in a trench coat starts running after you in a dark parking lot, anyone with half a brain stem is gonna be like, yo, I gotta start running too. So just as Colleen locks the door, Lisa actually tries to open the car door. And when she realizes that she can't get in, she starts asking for help, saying that her boyfriend forgot to pick her up from the airport. She asks Colleen if she could give her a ride or use her cell phone. Colleen's like, no, absolutely not. But hang tight, I'll send someone for you. Desperate at this point, Lisa starts crying and says she can't hear what shipment is saying, which is when Colleen makes a huge mistake and opens the window, just enough for Lisa to spray pepper spray into her car. Luckily, Colleen was able to drive away and immediately call the police. And when officers arrived at the scene shortly after, they found that Lisa was nearby and she was trying to get rid of her disguise. And along with finding the bag of weapons that she had packed with her, detectives also said that Lisa was carrying a copy of those emails between Bill and Colleen. In the end, Lisa claimed that she was only trying to talk to Colleen. But it seemed pretty clear from the evidence they found that Lisa may have intended to cause some harm. It's important to note, at this point, Colleen had no idea who this woman was. She said that she thought that she was just a criminal doing a random crime, which makes sense. It probably seemed like a regular old carjacking. But a few hours later, while she was down at the police station, Colleen noticed a NASA ID on the desk of one of the officers. And then weirdly, she heard the word astronaut in the hallway. She was so confused by this, and she literally thought that this woman stole a NASA ID, not even considering that she was somehow connected to her lover, Bill. It's easy to laugh about the whole diaper thing, but this all must have been pretty terrifying for Colleen, right? But while the media quickly whipped themselves into a frenzy around the more salacious details, everyone forgot to ask the only important question. Was Colleen okay? Since the incident, Colleen Shipman moved to Alaska and says she still experiences anxiety, migraines, and nightmares to this day, and keeps herself armed 24/7. So it's safe to say that this incident understandably caused her some lasting trauma. But in the end, there's a glimmer of hope, because Colleen and Bill ended up getting married. So I guess it was all worth it. They now have a son and live together in Alaska, running the website adventurewrite.com, which promotes writing for kids, which is actually really wholesome. So I guess this part of the story has a happy ending at least? Lisa was initially charged with attempted kidnapping with intent to inflict bodily harm, battery, and burglary of a vehicle using a weapon. If convicted, she could have faced up to life in prison for more serious felony charges. She pled guilty to a reduced sentence of burglary of an automobile and misdemeanor battery, and under her plea deal was sentenced to only 2 days in jail and a year of probation. Lisa apologized to Colleen in court, saying she was sincerely sorry for her actions and promised to never contact Colleen again. In 2010, she received an other than honorable discharge from the Navy. And maybe worst of all was that Lisa became a punchline for talk show hosts and news reporters around the world as the diaper-wearing astronaut. Even though her lawyer would later claim that she was never even wearing the diapers and they were just toddler diapers left in the car from when her family evacuated from Hurricane Rita, despite the fact that it was apparently Lisa herself who told the police that she had worn them so she wouldn't need to make any stops, right? Likely story. I guess the jury's still out on this one. In any case, obviously her career at NASA was over, and she became the first active astronaut to ever be fired from NASA. As for where Lisa is now, well, she's living a quiet life in a modest home outside of Houston, Texas, where she works in a private sector. Understandably, she does her best to avoid the media, declining to give interviews on the disgraceful incident that happened more than 15 years ago. That was a lot. And if you'd like to hear more totally wild scorned lover stories, let me know in the comments below and we'll see what we can dig up for you guys. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. My name is Mac and I'll see you next time on Killer Bites.
Do you ever watch football games and wonder what the players are like in real life? Well, for NFL player Aaron Hernandez, we don't have to wonder because his story is everywhere. And it's a pretty crazy one.
So Aaron was a star football player who allegedly slayed 2 people, went on to play an entire season, and then slayed another football player who was dating his fiance's sister.
After Aaron was arrested, he was immediately dropped from the league, but his crimes made waves in the media. His arrest even turned into a pop culture trend.
Aaron Hernandez was a tight end for the New England Patriots football team. He was a beast on the field and everyone knew it.
Aaron grew up in Connecticut with violent parents who had both committed crimes of their own, so we're already off to a great start.
Aaron had one brother who also played football, and their dad was super invested in their athletic careers. He was constantly pushing them to be better and held them to very high standards.
Aaron started playing football in high school and quickly became the MVP. In one of his games, he took a blow to the head and was rushed to the hospital, but he recovered pretty quickly and got back out on the field.
In high school, Aaron was getting scouted by a bunch of colleges. He was recruited to play at the University of Connecticut with his brother, but turned down that offer to play for the University of Florida.
When he first started playing for the Florida Gators, Aaron was only 17 years old. The reason he was so young is because his principal let him graduate early. 17 is pretty young to already be starting for a college football team. Like, that's so much pressure.
So socially, Aaron was known as the life of the party. When he was a freshman in college, Aaron went out to a restaurant with Tim Tebow for drinks. Casual. Wait, but wasn't Aaron 17 at the time? So he must have used a fake ID to get in. Honestly, that's the least of our worries.
So Aaron had 2 drinks but refused to pay the bill, so he was escorted out by the manager. As the manager walked away, Aaron punched him in the face and ruptured his eardrum. Oof, that had to hurt. And Aaron clearly had some anger issues if he just punched a random restaurant employee for kicking him out because he wouldn't pay for drinks that are technically legal.
But this was just the beginning of Aaron's bad streak. He was regularly taking substances and actually failed a toxicology screening his sophomore year, so he was benched for the entire season, which I'm sure his coaches weren't happy about.
Once he got back to playing for the Gators, Aaron was on fire. He was making receptions left and right and won a bunch of awards for his insane talent. He was so talented that he skipped out on his senior year in college and entered the NFL draft in 2010.
He signed with the New England Patriots and began playing for them the next season. Well, Aaron was an amazing player and the Patriots knew it because in 2012, they signed him to a $40 million contract extension, the second largest contract ever offered for a tight end.
And Aaron ended up donating $50,000 of that money to a charity, which everyone thought was so generous, but honestly, that's nothing compared to how much he got in the contract.
But even after he made it to the NFL, Aaron couldn't stay away from trouble. Since the Patriots were based in Massachusetts, that meant Aaron was right by his hometown, so he started messing around with his criminal friends again. He was constantly smoking the devil's lettuce and was also on other substances.
Oh, and he lived with his girlfriend, but apparently had a separate apartment just to store weapons and illegal goodies.
I feel like getting an entire apartment for all of that is a bit much. Like, he could have just gotten a storage unit or something, but he genuinely thought it was a better idea to go through the trouble of applying for an apartment and signing a lease and everything. That's commitment. Like 12 months worth of commitment.
Despite his apartment arsenal, Aaron was still living the life of a star football player. He continued to play until he was arrested for slaying the 27-year-old semi-pro football player Odin Lloyd.
So Odin played for the Boston Bandits and was dating Shania Jenkins, who is the sister of Aaron's fiance. On June 17, 2013, Odin was found lifeless in an industrial park in Massachusetts, right by Aaron's house. He had 5 bullet wounds on his body, and the casings from all bullets were found at the scene.
Officials determined the weapon used on Odin was a .45 caliber Glock, but they couldn't find the weapon anywhere. Investigators immediately suspected Aaron. He had a history of violence, lived right by the location of the corpse, and was the last person Odin was seen with alive.
The day after the body was discovered, investigators searched Aaron's home. They asked to see the footage from his security camera, but it seemed like Aaron had deleted some of the videos from the day of the crime. Aaron turned over his cell phone to the police, but it had been crushed to pieces. Officers also found out he hired cleaners the day Odin's body was found.
Okay, that's all super sus. And I wonder what he said when he gave him his smashed phone. Like, Aaron had plenty of money to own a fully functioning phone, so there's definitely something sketchy going on there.
After the initial search, investigators kept a close eye on Aaron while they tried to find a way to link him to the crime. On June 21st, videos surfaced of Aaron and Odin together the night of the big event. Once the police found out that Aaron was the last person Odin was seen with, they started to do some digging.
After going through various text conversations, this is what they determined. Aaron texted 2 of his friends from Connecticut asking them to come hang out with him in Massachusetts. That same night, Aaron met up with Odin to exchange some goods.
Based on a text thread between Odin and his sister, officials found out that Odin had ridden in Aaron's passenger seat that night. Over text, he asked his sister if she knew who he was with, and he said NFL. Once his sister found out he was talking about Aaron, she thought he just told her to brag, but maybe it was a cry for help.
Wait, that's so tragic that Odin was such a big fan of Aaron. Like, he was probably ecstatic to be riding in his car, but little did he know he was about to get rubbed out by the dude.
On June 22nd, while Aaron remained the main suspect on Odin's case, a man from Florida filed a civil suit against Aaron for almost slaying him that February.
This man was Aaron's dealer, Alexander. In February of 2013, Aaron took a trip to Miami and met up with Alexander. Alexander fell asleep in a car ride with Aaron and said he woke up with a Glock pointed right at his face.
The next morning, he was found lying in a parking lot with a bullet hole between his eyes. He ended up losing his right eye but survived the attack. But Alexander never told the police what happened. Instead, he sought revenge on his own.
In the months following this run-in, he was constantly threatening Aaron. One time, he texted Aaron saying he had a bunch of semi-automatic weapons, bulletproof vests, and a crew that ran 6 deep.
Well, that's a threat if I've ever heard one. Like, this dude is not messing around. Why did Alexander never report it, though? Because that may have gotten Aaron arrested to prevent what happened to Odin.
Well, Alexander didn't come forward and file a civil suit against Aaron until he got word of Odin's demise. But this isn't the only other big crime Aaron allegedly committed.
Back in September of 2007, when Aaron was just a freshman in college, 2 men were hit with bullets on the street. They both survived and gave a description of their attacker to the cops, which matched Aaron's build and appearance, and one of the victims even identified Aaron in a lineup.
No charges were ever made, but a detective on the case reinvestigated the whole thing and said he didn't think it was Aaron because other witnesses reported seeing a man with a different appearance.
The victim, who identified Aaron in the police lineup, later took back his statement that Aaron was his attacker. He said he assumed it was Aaron at first because they had gotten into a fight at the club earlier that night.
Even though Aaron was dropped as the main suspect of this case, people knew he was capable of doing it because in 2012, 2 men were slain in a drive-by incident in Boston that Aaron was believed to have committed. The 2 victims from this crime were sitting in their car outside of a club when someone drove up next to them and fired several bullets into their car. The police checked out the security footage from the club and spotted Aaron.
They just assumed it was a coincidence that he was there and never considered him a main suspect since there was no physical evidence that tied him to the incident. Okay, they definitely should have investigated him more at the time. It seems like these cops were showing favoritism to Aaron since he was a star football player. But they didn't pin him to the crime until after the whole thing happened with Odin, which we should actually get back to right now. So as a refresher, Odin had been offed, and the police had already searched Aaron's house once, but it looked like he was trying to cover up any connection he had to the crime.
But after officials searched Aaron's house a second time, they found enough to arrest him. This was on June 26th. When Aaron was arrested, the media went wild.
So a bunch of pictures were taken and posted of Aaron in cuffs with his shirt on over his arms. That pose was actually turned into a pop culture trend called Hernandezing, where people would pose for photos with their shirt pulled over their arms and their hands behind their back.
Leave it to the people of the internet to turn anything into a trend, even a villainous football player's arrest.
Once word got out, the Patriots immediately dropped Aaron from the team and tried to get all of his merch off the sports websites ASAP. They voided the rest of his contract payments and all of his brand deals were shut down. Bye, Felicia.
Aaron's college and high school also tried to get rid of any trace of him, including plaques and photos on the wall, but it's kind of weird because Aaron was such an integral part of those schools that they couldn't erase him even if they tried. And instead of pretending like they had nothing to do with him, I feel like that would be a good opportunity to open up a conversation about the incident.
Once he was arrested, investigators continued to search for dirt on Aaron that tied him to the crime. So even though some of the security footage from Aaron's house had been deleted, they ended up finding a bunch of shady videos from the camera. In one of the clips recovered from the big night, Aaron is seen walking into his house with a dark, curved object that looks like a Glock.
Spoiler alert, it was. When questioned about the whole thing, Aaron's fiancée Shayana told officials that Aaron asked her to go downstairs to their storage area and move a box. She was instructed to dispose of it and told officials she threw it away in a random dumpster but didn't know where. Yeah, right. Sounds like that was a pretty memorable evening for her to just forget a detail like that.
But Shayana claims she never knew what was in the box, but from the way Aaron talked to her about it, she knew it was serious. Considering the fact that they never found the weapon used at the crime, most people assume that's what was in there. Investigators confirmed Shayana's story when they went through the security footage and found clips of her going down to the basement and coming up with the mystery box. But we still never find out what was inside.
Oh, here's another hot piece of evidence. So the car Aaron used that night was a rental. The cops went to the rental place, searched the car, and asked the employees if they knew anything about the incident. One of the employees said that when Aaron returned the car, he tossed a few things in the trash. Police looked through the trash and found a bullet casing with blue bubblegum attached to it.
One of the employees at the rental place said she knew that was from Aaron because he had blue gum and even offered her a piece. But this wasn't your average peppermint flavored gum. It was literally blue cotton candy bubblicious bubblegum. Wait, that's amazing. He literally just committed a gruesome crime and then popped a piece of cotton candy gum.
Investigators ended up getting proof of Aaron buying the gum at a gas station. They also recovered footage of him at the gas station with a towel around his neck. And when Odin's body was found, investigators also spotted that same towel at the crime scene. And there you have it. But wait until you hear about another piece of evidence the prosecution tried to use in their case.
So Aaron already had a bunch of tattoos all over, but after the Boston double slaying, he got a tattoo of a revolver with 5 rounds, the same amount of bullets fired in that crime. And after Odin was rubbed out, Aaron got a tattoo that said, "God forgives." The prosecution tried to use those tattoos as evidence to prove his guilt in court. They even brought his tattoo artist to the stand to testify.
The dude was covered in tats, so how did they know those meant he committed the crimes? Well, unless the tattoo explicitly said, "I whacked Odin."
So after Aaron was arrested, police officers also arrested his 2 friends from Connecticut since they were in the car with him when the whole thing went down. They were first charged for the crime in first degree, but both ended up getting charged as accessories to the incident. Aaron's fiancée and cousin were also charged as accessories.
During Aaron's trial for Odin's case, he was officially connected to the drive-by slayings in Boston that happened back in 2012.
And the only reason they probably investigated him as a suspect at this point was because he was arrested for Odin's case.
In April of 2015, the jury found Aaron guilty for wiping out Odin, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
And when he was in prison, he was apparently super content with the whole thing. Like, he wasn't fazed at all by going from a super nice house and a stellar football career to a prison cell. He was actually under the impression that he was going to somehow get released from jail and go back to the NFL.
Yo, this man is delusional. They already took his jersey off the merch website, so it's over.
OMG, imagine how awkward it would have been if he did go back to play football. Like, I bet the coaches and players would be so on edge knowing what he's capable of.
In December of 2015, a prison guard found a blade in Aaron's cell, so he was moved to an isolated unit. The whole time Aaron was in jail, his trial for the 2012 Boston slayings was still going on. On April 14, 2017, he was eventually found not guilty for that crime, but was charged with illegal possession of a firearm.
4 days later, Aaron was found hanging by his bedsheets in his cell. He left 3 notes next to a Bible in his cell. One for his fiancée, one for his daughter, and one for his alleged prison boyfriend.
About a month after his passing, a judge vacated Aaron's conviction for Odin's termination. There's a weird law in Massachusetts that erases all convictions if a defendant passes away before all of their possible appeals are cashed in on. Which is so weird to me though, because at that point, Aaron had already passed, so I'm not sure if that really made a difference.
And what's even more weird is that 2 years later, the charges were reinstated and the strange law was done away with. But that's not where Aaron's story ends. After his fatal exit, examiners performed an autopsy and determined he had serious brain damage. He was determined to have stage 3 CTE, a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head trauma.
CTE damages the brain impulse control, which means that could have explained some of Aaron's aggressive tendencies. It is believed that all of Aaron's head injuries from football and his childhood caused the CTE.
The neuropathologist who conducted Aaron's brain examination said she's never seen such extensive damage in an athlete's brain under the age of 46. Aaron was 27 at the time of his passing.
In addition to the CTE, Aaron was allegedly abused by his father, physically violated as a kid, and he was using substances. Add a little brain damage to the mix, and you have yourself a Terminator. And even though people try to piece Aaron's story together, no one could figure out his motive behind whacking Odin.
Some people think Odin was trying to expose Aaron for illegal activity involving substances. Others think Odin knew details about the double slaying in Boston and was going to rat him out. And there's another theory where people believe Aaron was homosexual and Odin found out about it, so Aaron was trying to silence him.
Whatever the reason, we can't go back and change what happened. An innocent man got in the path of a troubled NFL player and sadly lost his life.
Coaches always want aggressive players that will go out there and rip the other players' heads off, but I don't think they mean that literally.
But hey, at least he has a pack of cotton candy bubblegum, right?
Well, that's the scoop on Aaron Hernandez, and now I'm hungry for game day snacks. Thanks for watching. Hey everybody, we are back with another episode of Killer Bites, and this one is quite popular to those who happen to be Little Monsters, aka Lady Gaga fans. Today I'm talking about Patrizia Reggiani and her murder-for-hire plot to kill her ex-husband Maurizio Gucci. That's right, that Gucci. We'll see how fame and fortune can truly change a person and get into where Patrizia is today. Let's jump on in, shall we? Our story begins in Vignola, Italy on December 2nd, 1948, where Patrizia Martinelli was born. Patrizia was an only child raised by her mother Silvana, who worked as a waitress and a launderer. Sadly, Patrizia never knew who her real father was, but was eventually adopted by her stepfather, Fernando, when she was 12 years old. Fernando was a trucking and transportation magnate, and because of his status, this threw Patrizia and her mother into a world of small wealth and status. The family moved to Milan, which was still on the up and up at the time, and Patrizia finished her schooling there. After graduating high school, she enrolled in classes to become a translator and became fluent in French and English. Patrizia's friends saw her interest in becoming a socialite starting very early in life. All this hoping and dreaming would finally pay off in November of 1970. At a party in Milan, Patrizia was there to dance, be the life of the party, and meet someone who could take her to the next level. That person? Maurizio Gucci, the heir to the Gucci fashion house fortune. Now, Patrizia and Maurizio could not have been more different in personality. Patrizia was a socialite who wanted to be out and about, while Maurizio was far more reserved and shy. Patrizia said in an interview with The Guardian in 2016, "I didn't think much of him at first. He was just a quiet boy whose teeth crossed over at the front. But something connected between the two of them that night, and soon after, they started dating." Maurizio allegedly asked Patrizia to marry him on their second ever date. So, they moved quickly. But just because the couple was happy, it didn't mean that everyone else was. Especially not Maurizio's father, Rodolfo. You know how rich people stay rich? By keeping those who are not rich out of their lives and fortune. Rodolfo viewed Patrizia as a gold digger and social climber who was only after Maurizio to take his fortune. The protective energy made sense as Rodolfo had raised Maurizio all on his own after the death of his wife. 17 years later and some other woman comes in trying to ruin all that? I guess you would be a little suspicious and cautious. But Patrizia was a major point of contention between the father and son. So much so that Rodolfo disowned Maurizio and the two did not speak to each other for 2 years. Maurizio packed his bags and moved in with Patrizia and her family. He got a job working at Fernando's transportation company, and the two continued to date. Despite the massive pushback from Rodolfo, the two were young, in love, and desperate to tie the knot. They ended up getting married in 1972 in Milan, where none of the Gucci family showed up. In fact, Rodolfo was so opposed to the marriage that he went to the archbishop begging him to stop the ceremony. This was unsuccessful. While the family drama is interesting, Patrizia hated the separation of the two families and wanted to heal the relationship between her husband and his father. She made it her mission to repair what had been broken, and she made it happen. Patrizia had a way with words, and as a late wedding gift, Rodolfo got the newlyweds a beautiful luxury penthouse in the Olympic Tower in New York City. Why New York, you ask? Well, the Gucci empire was interested in having someone younger take over and move the company further into the US. Where better than the biggest, most fashionable city in the States? Because of Maurizio's time in the US, the Gucci brand thrived. They had 2 stores on Fifth Avenue and expanded into other apparel such as luggage, bags, shoes, and accessories. Patrizia loved living in New York because this gave her access to all kinds of high-status parties and events. She even became friends with Jackie Kennedy Onassis, the First Lady of the United States of America. No biggie. After the couple moved to the United States, they had 2 children. In 1976, they gave birth to a baby girl, Alessandra, and in 1981, another baby girl named Allegra. The two little girls would have the childhood directly opposite of their mother, attending the best schools, going on lavish vacations, and having weekend getaways to islands, farmhouses, etc. Maurizio never seemed to have the confidence that Patrizia had. She knew that Maurizio could have such an incredible life if only he could stand up and become a force within the Gucci family. And in 1983, he would be thrust into that life after the death of his father Rodolfo, who left Maurizio a 50% stake in the company, the largest of anyone attached to the name. Before his passing, however, Rodolfo told Patrizia to watch out for Maurizio. He said the fortune would go to his head and completely change their relationship. We love a foreshadowing moment. And when people say more money, more problems, they aren't joking. Everyone felt like they were entitled to certain percentages of the company and that they knew what was best for the business going forward. Of course, no one ever agreed and tensions continued to rise. Aldo, one of Maurizio's uncles, was tasked with spearheading the US market and was even called a man of great vision by his nephew Maurizio. He helped expand the company to Beverly Hills, Chicago, Florida, and open their first store in New York. However, he was caught siphoning off millions of dollars and because of this was sued by Gucci and Maurizio became the chairman of the company. Aldo also pleaded guilty to tax evasion charges in 1986 and paid more than $7 million to the government. You want to know who spilled the beans to the feds? His son, Paolo Gucci. This is what Patrizia wanted all along, but the Gucci brand was starting to lose its uniqueness and was quickly becoming bombarded with knockoffs. On top of that, the company was so far in the red, so far in debt, that it was looking too difficult to come back from. And just when you think things couldn't get any worse, they do. Maurizio and the entire house of Gucci found themselves deep in legal battles. With so much stress in his career, Maurizio started to pay less and less attention to his family. His daughters and Patrizia were cast to the shadows. All Patrizia wanted to do was help her husband, but her actions quickly became smothering instead of helpful. She started turning Maurizio and his family members against each other. She wanted to sustain the Gucci name, but she also wanted to make sure she would have the money and lifestyle she worked so hard to get. Nothing and nobody was going to get in the way of her wealthy, lavish, extravagant lifestyle, especially not Maurizio's family. Maurizio stopped looking to her for help and guidance and instead went to lawyers to work on the company's issues. This hurt Patrizia because she felt like the two were a team. He stopped confiding in her and became more and more detached. Patrizia said that he stopped coming home during lunchtime, which was a normal ritual, and was thrust further into his work and all the legal troubles that came with it. In May of 1985, everything finally boiled over. Their marriage was in complete shambles. Maurizio told Patrizia that he was going on a work trip in Florence, which was not uncommon. However, the following day, he sent a friend over to the house to tell Patrizia that the marriage was over and he wanted a divorce. Instead of asking for divorce in person, Maurizio asked her to keep up appearances and attend Gucci functions and events with him. He said he would continue to support her lifestyle, but that the marriage was over. This flipped Patrizia's world upside down. She was utterly heartbroken and took solace with her good friend Giuseppina Auriemma, who she called Pina. Pina was an astrologer and would read Patrizia's tarot cards and fortune to her often. She was one of the only things holding the woman together. It didn't help that Maurizio had moved on. He began dating a woman named Paola Franchi, who was a childhood friend of Maurizio, and even attended his wedding to Patrizia. This only made Patrizia more resentful, angry, and heartbroken. She wasn't ready to move on, but he already had. There wasn't much else she could do. Unless... dun dun dun... Now, while Patrizia was crying and getting her palm read from Pina, Maurizio had bigger fish to fry. Sure, he didn't have to worry about his ex-wife getting in the middle of things anymore, but the company was still down bad. They were losing money left and right, but Maurizio had a plan. He joined up with an investment banking company called InvestCorp to slowly buy out everyone in his family's share, or secretly push them out without their knowledge. Because of this, a bunch of money started funneling back into Maurizio's pockets. And yet again, with more money comes what? More problems. He hired a retail executive by the name of Don Mello, who helped make the brand more exclusive again. Next, he hired up-and-coming designer Tom Ford, yes, that Tom Ford, to design their new ready-to-wear styles. The brand was slowly starting to rise from the ashes, but with little help from Maurizio. In 1993, InvestCorp bought out Maurizio's 50% share, and after that, no one from the Gucci family was on the board for the Gucci brand. It wasn't until 1994 that Patrizia agreed to follow through with the divorce. Maurizio, along with funding her lifestyle, agreed to pay her almost $1.5 million in alimony. He also demanded that Patrizia stop using the last name Gucci, as she was no longer a part of the family. But just because the court said to stop didn't mean she was going to stop, okay? She continued to use the name, stating, "I still feel like a Gucci. In fact, the most Gucci of them all." She felt like she was losing the power that came with the Gucci name, so instead of dropping it, even by court order, she continued to use it to her advantage. Things took a turn for the worse on March 27, 1995, when Maurizio Gucci was found shot to death outside his office in Milan just after 8:30 in the morning. The hitman fired 3 times, the final bullet going into Maurizio's temple. The world was in shock, and everyone started giving their opinions of what really went down. Was it a bad business deal? Familial hatred? Or was Patrizia somehow behind it? Now, if you were me, you would probably think that Patrizia being behind all of it was just a little too on the nose. A bitter ex-wife after the Gucci fortune and jealous of her husband's new relationship. It just seems so cliche, you know? However, Patrizia had been insanely open about her hatred of her ex-husband, even going as far to tell a former housekeeper of hers, "If it's the last thing I do, I want to see him dead." And on her daughter's 18th birthday, she asked her divorce lawyer flat out if there was a way she could have Maurizio killed. She wasn't trying to be subtle at all. The further the investigation went, the more fingers started to point at Patrizia. For starters, Maurizio planned on marrying Paola. If that marriage had gone through, Patrizia's alimony would have dropped drastically. And by drastically, I mean $860,000 instead of $1.5 million. On the day Maurizio was killed, Patrizia wrote one word in her diary: Paradisos, the Greek word for paradise. Come to find out, Maurizio was aware of his ex-wife's plan to have him killed. After a surgery to have a brain tumor removed, Patrizia found that Maurizio was nowhere in sight. This angered her to such a point that she recorded cassette tapes saying, "Maurizio, I'm not going to give you a minute of peace. You are a painful appendage that we all want to forget. The inferno for you is yet to come." These were then delivered to Maurizio for his listening pleasure. Mere hours after Maurizio's death, Patrizia demanded that Paola move out of the apartment she shared with Maurizio to make room for their daughters and, of course, Patrizia to move back in. After all, they were the ones who inherited the property, and Paola was an unwanted guest. Paola spent the short amount of time she could grabbing all of her belongings, including utensils and lighting fixtures. Patrizia organized the funeral and sat in the front row with her daughters. Reporters outside were desperate for statements and sound bites, and they perhaps got one of the most iconic and horrific ones from Patrizia. She said, "On a human level, I'm sorry. On a personal level, I can't say the same thing." She was really out here saying everything but, "I hired a hitman to kill my ex-husband." For years, nothing came of finding Maurizio's murders. There were little to no leads, and while it seemed obvious that Patrizia was to blame, there was no tangible evidence putting her at the front of authorities' minds. Investigators scoured bank records, contracts, anything that could place a bad business deal as the reason for Maurizio's death. Nothing. In 1997, the police received an anonymous tip that a small group of men and 2 women were the ones responsible for the murder. Apparently, a young man named Gabriel overheard a doorman at his hotel bragging to someone about planning the hit on the head of Gucci. Pina, Patrizia's friend, worked as the middleman connecting the angry ex-wife to Benedetto, an owner of a pizzeria and a mechanic who worked nearby to do the dirty job and drive the getaway vehicle. He sourced the firearm, built a silencer for it, and carried out the hit. Investigators followed the suspects, placing recording devices in their cars, and got their confessions on tape. There was no denying who had planned and carried out the crime. In 1998, Patrizia was eventually arrested wearing a mink coat and loads of jewelry. She was sentenced to 29 years in prison, which was later changed to 26 years. Patrizia demanded that the sentencing be overturned due to the brain tumor she had. But after 43 boxes of evidence were presented at the trial, along with all of her diary entries writing out every single interaction she'd had with Maurizio, no one had much sympathy for her. In 2000, Patrizia attempted to take her own life in prison with a bedsheet, but was found by prison guards. 5 years later, Patrizia's legal team convinced the prison to let her have her beloved pet ferret stay with her, despite pets not being allowed. In October of 2016, Patrizia was finally released from prison because of good behavior after only serving 18 years. Immediately after her release, she went shopping with a pet parrot perched on her shoulder. Her daughters refused to see her, and this angered her greatly. When it comes to Lady Gaga, Patrizia said she's angered by her decision to portray her in the House of Gucci film. Lady Gaga did not come to meet her in person, and to Patrizia, this is the most rude thing you can do. Well, I hope that if you didn't get the chance to see House of Gucci in theaters, this gave you some insight into what everyone has been talking about. I want to know what all of you think about this case. Do you think with more money comes more problems? To me, it definitely seems that way. Perhaps if there had been a better work-life balance, things could have been different. But what do I know? Instead of wearing real diamonds, I'm over here wearing cheap costume jewelry that turns my fingers green. Until next time, I'm Allie, and thanks for watching Killer Bites.